So this is a great question from George, who has written in to say, Sunak is putting a lot of effort and political capital into one area of policy not represented in his 5 priorities. That area is AI policy, where he wants the UK to lead on both AI innovation and AI safety. There are reports he sees this as his legacy and reports he is roping the king into his upcoming summit. Is this the tech bro Sunak we've seen before or something new?
This is a really interesting question because when I was at the Labour Party conference, which we just got back from yesterday, I was speaking, there was a lot of business representatives there, and I was speaking to a number of them, especially in the tech side of things. And they were really surprised that Sunak or any other sort of senior minister hadn't mentioned this AI summit. It's the world's first sort of global AI summit that's happening in November during that conference, because they thought that this was something that Sunak was going to define as one of his priorities, but also his kind of legacy issue. And they was kind of scratching their heads about that and saying Labour seemed to be more in tune with technological advancement than the Conservative government were at their conference. And actually Tony Blair and his whole thing about, this is time for the technological revolution has really fed through into a lot of the stuff that Labour have been saying. So it's strange, isn't it? Because Sunak has staked sort of a lot of his reputation in being ahead on AI, but that seems to have gone quiet, Will.
Well, it's the world's first AI safety summit, but France is trying to get in there. They've got one, I think it's 2 weeks later. So there are a bunch of countries sort of pitching to be the AI regulator home, and I think we've seen from the laws that have led to the development of the internet as it now stands, how important that can be in terms of your businesses and also like sort of geopolitics. So, in 1996, the US passed this law, the Communications Decency Act, which had this one little bit in it, Section 230, which absolved internet service providers of legal responsibility for the stuff that they piped into people's computers. And that little bit of law has become this sort of defining factor for the whole of, it was passed long before social media was really a thing. And, all of our regulations, such as it is around social media, which is not much at all, really. We haven't actually passed any laws regarding social media. There's the online safety bill, was not actually law yet. So, yeah, I mean, that has all been shaped by that tiny little bit of law. So being there at the beginning can be incredibly influential. And I think you could also see it in terms of what it means for Sunak. I kind of think one thing that people perhaps don't really appreciate about Sunak is that he's spent more time in finance than he has in politics. So he has spent more time being an investment analyst and a hedge fund manager than he has being a politician, let alone prime minister. So I think it's quite helpful to think of his decisions in that sense, in that he is perhaps looking at the 5 priorities as, a hedge fund manager would, or an asset manager would have a bunch of safe stuff, a bunch of government bonds, long positions on defensive stocks, investments in utilities and stuff that are probably not going to change in value all that much, but hopefully will go up a bit. And then they would have some more risky stuff. They would balance against that in order to bring up the portfolio as a whole. So it's kind of, that's your short positions on things or your speculative investments in something that might never happen. And I think to him personally, it could be a bit of that. It's it's not the 20 quid you put on the favourite in the race. It's the £1 bet on the 100 to 1 outsider. So there's relatively low risk for him in saying this should be our thing, because there are a lot of people who say, yeah, fine, sounds about right. But also, it's a way of having a bit of a punt on something that might be potentially economically and societally transformative, and being there at the beginning of it. So yeah, it's perhaps a low risk bit of legacy building. One more thing that I think is particularly interesting about this summit is the position that they are taking in contrast to other people, particularly in the EU, is that they are focusing on what they call frontier safety. So they're focusing on the idea that, right, we're going to regulate this godlike superintelligence before it kills us all, which, when you first hear it, it sounds like, yeah, we should definitely, if there is going to be a godlike superintelligence and it's going to threaten to kill us all, then we should probably have some laws around that. But it's also, that is really what the AI industry wants politicians to concentrate on. They want politicians to say, right, we need to think about this as an existential risk because A, it makes them look tremendously powerful, like they've developed something that really could kill us all, and B, it distracts from
what they're doing, until
the,
that regulation eventually comes in.
They distract from the necessary regulation of them nicking everyone's photos and all the books and all the music and like whizzing it up into like new free content for big tech companies.
What does it tell us about Sunak? Because our person who wrote in the question said he's got this tech bro reputation, and he does. He's got this focus on Silicon Valley. There was that story about the green card, and he is someone who kind of has some of those parts to his personality. He does Peloton and Soul Cycle, and has that kind of, I suppose, character to him. But it really does jar, this kind of idea of someone who is a part of that kind of modern technocratic global elite jars with what he's trying to represent his party as, which is more of a nativist, Little Englander kind of mindset, which you saw come out very much at Conservative Party conference. Maybe he's not the one saying all of those things, but he's certainly giving licence to Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, and other similar voices saying those kind of things. So is he in a bit of an identity crisis?
I think so. I think that was quite a good, I think you described it quite well there. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when Sunak came in, I think there was a lot of positive chatter around the fact that he did seem like this sort of technocratic, quite modern prime minister. He was young, he had these links to business and industry, and maybe that would be really good for Britain. And we saw some stuff in the autumn or spring statement, I can't remember which, where he was talking about, the investment grants. But actually, as you say, it's kind of jarring because it's a bit out of step with actually how the Conservative Party is coming across at the minute, which you're right, does seem a bit more, almost like it's going backwards a little bit. It's reverting to tradition. It's being a bit more sort of, it wants to engage less with the outer world and more sort of just Britain on its own. It does feel a bit jarring. What I think is interesting, and it touches on what Will said, is that Sunak, as has worked in finance for many years. He is that tech bro. He has these links to America, and I can totally see this being his pet project that he really wants to, to be known for. And possibly it has been a bit disappointing for him that it actually hasn't been a priority for his party or indeed the country. We saw not that long ago, Tony Blair did an interview in the Financial Times where he talked about, I think you touched on this, he talked about the importance of tech and innovation and harnessing AI and how these would become big political priorities. And in a way, he's correct. AI touches on every single policy area pretty much. I mean, it has so much potential to make things quicker and cheaper, and it could save businesses and government quite a lot of money, but people are very afraid of it. It isn't publicly appetizing to say we're really going to harness AI because people think, does that mean my job's going to go? Does that mean that what does that mean for me? So you can imagine there would be quite a lot of discontent from the public about that agenda, similar to the sort of criticisms we saw about the green prosperity stuff. It was like, is this out of step with what working people need right now? So I think Sunak has had to backtrack a little bit on his ambitions in the sort of AI and tech space. And when Tony Blair did this interview in the FT, I was wondering, I wonder if that means that Starmer's going to lean into this in his speech, if it's going to be like a new Harold Wilson white heat thing. And he didn't actually, did he? It was very much cost of living, housing, Tories have failed. And I think that's because the public just they don't want to hear about how we're going to grasp AI. They want to do the sort of safety regulatory aspects, but I don't think they want to hear AI is the future, because I think they don't think that any leader right now has grips on it in order to harness it for good.
Yeah, and when polling companies actually ask the public about AI, and I know this because I am actually one of the people who is polled by Ipsos Mori, and they've been doing a lot of polling on AI. Don't know on whose behalf, but I assume from the questions that it is a political outfit, either the government or a major opposition party. But what they often ask is about your experience of AI, and it usually centers around customer service bots and things, and people have very negative views about those. And so I think you're right. I think the sort of gut reaction from the public is a little bit skeptical and suspicious of this thing, not just because it might be something that could steal your job, but just because the experience that we have as it is already can be quite negative and dehumanizing. And particularly on the populist right, there is definitely a skepticism about technology sort of inching its way into our lives. You saw the reaction at things like the idea of vaccine passports and even just an NHS app, that had a little bit of backlash. So I think Sunak is walking this very difficult balance because he is trying to attract that kind of base, clearly, with some of the rhetoric you're seeing from the government. But he's also trying to marry it with his sort of Californian mindset. Apparently that advanced qualification that he wants to bring in instead of A-levels and T-levels, apparently that's based on his view of what works in the education system in California. So he does see things through that lens, but it's colliding with the kind of way that the party thinks that the only way that it can possibly try and claw back some votes in the election next year.
Yeah, I mean, it leads him to make some quite odd statements, doesn't it? I thought it was amazing in his speech. So he described Keir Starmer as the walking definition of the 30-year political status quo I am here to end. So this is from somebody who went to private school, did PPE at Oxford, went straight to Goldman Sachs and was then parachuted into William Hague's old seat. I mean, what a mould breaker. What a riposte to the Davos consensus. And then he does stuff like scrapping HS2, which is, on the one hand, you could argue that is an untechnocratic policy in that, you're cancelling the CEO Express in favour of, trains for normal people. But actually, the reason that he gave for doing it is fiscal discipline, is ultimately a technocratic reason for doing everything. It's just like, we've looked at the spreadsheets and this is what makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's, doing something untechnocratic for profoundly technocratic reasons. So I think he can't escape really his own fundamental technocratic position.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think increasingly we're seeing from Sunak his image kind of being perceived slightly less and less favourably from the public. And I think that is, he has a business mindset, it seems. So yeah, he's looked at the books. This doesn't make financial sense anymore. Therefore, I'm doing the sensible thing and getting rid of it. Not realising that voters don't see political decisions in that way. It's not all just what is cost effective. It's, well, actually, what about all the money that we've put into it, and what about what we're supposed to do for the North? And I think he actually doesn't seem very well versed in engaging with those broader political questions when he makes decisions. And I think that was what was really jarring about HS2 and the way he handled it, was he almost expected everyone to say, oh yes, good thinking, well done, thank you for making those calculations, without realising that people were going to be really upset and confused as to why this had been allowed to go on for so long under his watch, and then just be scrapped without any kind of regard for what it would mean for the public and industry.
Yeah, and let's just look at what's actually been achieved. So in his budget, Jeremy Hunt vowed to spend $1 billion over 5 years on AI and supercomputing. And we've had the announcement that the UK government has confirmed that the first supercomputer will be hosted by the University of Edinburgh.
It's an exascale supercomputer.
Sorry,
and we all know what that is, don't we?
I'm imagining something with an exoskeleton.
Yeah, it kind of smashes its way around the country, threatening people. It's really impressive.
So what is that, Will? And is it something for the UK government to boast about, or?
Well, in terms of investing in computing power, I think there's a good argument for that, as in investing in compute rather than because if you look at AI investments around the world done by private businesses, it really looks like a one horse, maybe 2 horse race. It's basically America. The VC investments in AI in America are orders of magnitude bigger than almost every other country apart from China, and they're about twice as much as what's being invested in China. So hundreds of billions being poured into AI by private businesses in the US, and not as much everywhere else. But that's most of that in recent years is into generative AI. So, you know, the kind of thing, the large language models and things like that you see in ChatGPT. So that is a very difficult race for any other country to compete in. But other areas like, you know, quantum computing, more specific kinds of AI, you know, the underlying sort of design of chips and things like that, which the UK has a very strong history in. In that way, you can make more of, you know, things like the UK strength is arguably, you know, it's universities, it's research and development, you know, sort of not so much within companies, but, you know, the intellectual foundation that we have for building those technologies rather than the enormous capital that's available elsewhere.
And he's also said that he wants future computing projects to include domestically manufactured chips. So, you know, how much of a world-beating country are we in terms of making chips?
Well,
depends which sort of chip, right?
Yeah, in terms of frying in dripping, still absolutely world beating. Yeah, another area in which we've trounced the French. But so we were a world leader in 1978.
The good old days.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the late 70s, early 80s. You know, the British government was funding. It was supporting chip development in the UK. So, you know, one of the first big fabs was built here, the Ineos factory in the early 80s. That company was set up with tens of millions in UK government investment. And then Margaret Thatcher came along, and the part of government that had invested in it was privatised, and then it was sold off to a British company and then on to foreign investors, and is currently owned by a Chinese-owned company.
I knew that was coming.
So that's Newport Wafer Fab, which does still make a lot of chips. And so, like I said, the you know there are lots of people with skills in this country around that area, but the thing about making the kinds of advanced semiconductors that are most highly valued, especially for industries like AI, is they're basically made in one factory in Taiwan, because the supply chain is so complex and involves so much technology that basically one company can make all along the way. The investment needed for that, you know, for a new place to make advanced semiconductors is in the tens of billions. So, like, it's a very difficult thing for any country to pull together. Our strength is in the design of those sort of architectures. So the ARM architecture, which has been used in like hundreds of billions of devices, is sort of, you know, comes from ARM, which again was a British company started in the 80s. Again, no longer British in ownership, although still headquartered here. A graphics chip that kind of made the iPhone possible was built by a British company called Imagination Technologies. Again, owned by the Chinese now. So, in fact, owned by a company that's owned by the Chinese government. So, we're very good at coming up with the ideas and doing the stuff on paper, and then other people build it, monetize it, as has long been the issue for
the proud
British
tradition. What next for Rishi Sunak? Because, you know, if Labour does win the election, will he follow in Nick Clegg's footsteps, who went to Facebook, now Meta? The rumour, and this is unsubstantiated, I'm not saying this rumour is true, is that he is eyeing up a job at Google DeepMind if he loses the election. And I'm saying, I know as a journalist we shouldn't say things that aren't substantiated, but I'm saying this because I think it's useful for our listeners to know what the rumour in Westminster is, because it tells you how Rishi Sunak has seen, what his reputation is, what's going round. So that's not, you know, I'm not saying that that's true. Do we think that he might have a future in sort of tech?
I think that's if that's his sort of legacy project, if AI really is his the thing he really likes to talk about and the place where he has his contacts, then it would make sense that he'd be looking at that kind of job after government. And, the amount of knowledge he will have gathered being Prime Minister on how the UK's economy operates and how its relationship with investors works and the sort of things that a new Labour government might be looking at will make him very, very valuable, I think, to Google DeepMind or wherever else he might go. So, if I was Sunak, I'd be eyeing up a job in tech. Why not? There's good money in it, I hear. So, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure he will be all right for money, whatever career he chooses next. But a cynic, me, might look at the way he is proposing to regulate AI and say, well, that sounds a lot like the way in which Silicon Valley is proposing to regulate itself. So I'm sure he has I'm sure he really believes that a godlike superintelligence will emerge and that we will be able to make laws that will persuade it not to destroy us. So, full faith in him for that. But also, coincidentally, he is talking about things in the same terms that, companies like OpenAI are. The reason Nick Clegg got that job was because he was not only, a British lawmaker, but he was close to the European lawmakers who were Facebook's primary concern with regard to how they're regulated. So in terms of were I an AI company looking at, hiring Rishi Sunak, that's the thing that I would be hiring him for, whether or not he would still be an influential part of the conversation around how AI is regulated. So I guess that Bletchley Park summit, he'll have to, put on a good.
He'll have to get closer to Europe, basically. Yeah. we could be seeing the Brexit policy changing dramatically as Sunak comes closer to losing an election.
Yeah, or to the US, I guess. I guess so. The EU and the US are both sort of preparing their own AI regulation laws, and the extent to which he can demonstrate his involvement in those processes will be key to the UK's position primarily, but also perhaps his future.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.